Welcome to the highlights for Chapter 6 with Mr. Rodman on interest groups. Glad you could join us. Let's launch right into it by looking at the top 12 highlights from this chapter. Remember, the founders and framers believed that pluralism would help cure the mischiefs of factions, what James Madison referred to in the Federalist Papers as a concern, but a way to prevent them from gaining access and control to all of government was by using pluralism, the idea that no entity or no particular interest faction could control all levels of government, all branches of government, and all departments within those branches. That was the concept behind it. There are a lot of different types of interest groups, from social movements to economic groups, ideological ones based on beliefs, public interest groups like the Ralph Naders we talked about in class, as well as foreign policy groups interested in the foreign policy with our nation and others, as well as public sector groups. Lobbying happens among all of these different types of groups at varying levels, and a lobbyist is someone who does that sort of thing. Litigation is a way that if lobbying doesn't work and civil disobedience or protest or other action doesn't seem to be bringing about a lot of change, litigation is, or filing a lawsuit is one way to do so. And a great example of this is Brown versus Board of Education, where the attorney for the NAACP, Thurgood Marshall, who would be later named to the court by President Lyndon Johnson, he argued and argued the case before the Supreme Court that desegregation was a violation of the Equal Protection Clause, and the Supreme Court unanimously agreed with him in 1954, thus ultimately ending segregation in public schools. Another way, in addition to litigation, for them to, for an interest group to make their case known about a particular issue is to file an amicus brief or an amicus curiae brief, which is a friend of the court brief, and it's basically filed on one of the sides of a case that is being argued before the Supreme Court. And that case, basically an interest group is taking up a side, and obviously the reason they would do this is if they win, then they can say, hey, we were on the winning side. We filed an amicus brief in that case. We were successful in that the court sided with the position we took, and as a result, aren't we wonderful? And it furthers their legal standing in terms of the arguments that they're making. It also gives them a little bit more of a legal cachet to go up and lobby on Capitol Hill and say, well, we filed an amicus brief in a case, recently in which the Supreme Court did side with our arguments and so forth. Whether that was the reason they sided with the arguments or not is inconsequential. The idea is they can use it as some level of bragging rights in order to further their causes and obviously their interests. Let's talk for a second about what interest groups can and cannot do. First, they can form a PAC, a political action committee. They can also support PACs in terms of getting their members to donate money to PACs that are formed by other candidates for office or members of Congress. They can even form a SuperPAC that support candidates without direct involvement by the candidate. There can't be any coordination with the campaign, but the interest group can form a SuperPAC to do so. They can activate their members, and this is a powerful one because not just to donate money, but also to make their voices heard on Capitol Hill. Call your member of Congress and tell them you don't support this bill and to vote against it. And we're going to vote in support of people who are basically voting this down in November, and if they don't vote it down, we're going to vote against them. If their members are a pretty large enough group like the NRA or the NAACP or the AARP, they can have some pretty significant impact in doing that. They can also donate personally as lobbyists to a campaign. Again, they can get their members to donate money, and all of those numbers do add up in terms of support for a candidate. Let's talk about what they can't do. They can't give, as an interest group as a whole, they can't give money directly to an elected official, to their staff, or to members that are a part of the government or government officials. This is bribery. It is illegal. People have gone to jail or lost their offices over it. So it is important that we know that there cannot be direct bribes, but there are plenty of other ways to donate your money, as you can see in what interest groups can do, but giving directly to an elected official would not be one of them. The revolving door, we talked about this in a team challenge, but basically the revolving door is where government officials are basically leaving, and this would be like Democrats working in the White House right now. They would be leaving from the Obama administration to go work in the private sector, work for interest groups or think tanks for Democratic causes, because the Trump administration is coming in with more conservative or Republican officials. Those Republican officials have been in the wilderness for 8 years under the Obama administration, so they've been working in private interest groups and in think tanks outside. They're coming back in. That's the revolving door for them. Meanwhile, the Democrats are leaving. That's the revolving door for the Democrats. So this is a back and forth, and ultimately we see a lot of back and forth, as we're seeing right now with the appointing of Trump administration officials. And we saw this with the Obama administration when President Obama first won in 2008. So this continues to happen as administrations come and go. The government officials that support their policy work come and go. They go from the private sector to the government and back again. This is what we know as the revolving door. It is perfectly legal, and the process continues over time, as it has for a long, long time. In terms of the work of interest groups, what they can do inside and outside government. Inside government, this is where the issue networks and the iron triangles come in, because they can develop those relationships, that schmoozing among government officials, providing them with information, showing them how vital an interest group can be to what's important to them, supporting them with information, in addition, supporting their campaigns and getting their members to support the campaigns, the issues they care about, what's important to them, providing them with information from polling data to information and talking points on particular issues, polling information about how people care or don't care about issues to get them to either support or oppose an issue. All of that can be done from the inside in terms of that direct contact. From the outside, the interest groups can apply pressure. They can activate the members to call, write, send email or telegrams or petitions to government to tell them to do something or not do something. They can file lawsuits, litigation. They can file amicus briefs as friends of the court to promote a particular side or another. And they can use the media to get in front of the media in terms of that attention and to keep the pressure on them in order to get them to do something or not do something. That's really important, because that media aspect is really important depending on the size of the interest group. The NAACP can get up and argue in front of the media about something. That makes news. A smaller interest group couldn't do that. The AARP can do that, getting up and talking about particular issues that are important to them. That makes news. And again, smaller groups wouldn't have that effect or that ability to do that. Those iron triangles and those issue networks, as I talked about, very important here in terms of what interest groups can do inside and outside the government. Remember, the iron triangles are the strong relationships, those things that are built over a long period of time. They're not a particular issue that goes away once the issue is over. That's where the issue network comes in. It's a less formal arrangement. It's a shorter period of time. The iron triangle has happened over many, many years, if not decades, of members in Congress and members of the bureaucracy and members of interest groups. Even if those people have changed which of the three they work for, those relationships continue, and those parties that are involved are steadfast. They're very formal arrangements. They've stood the test of time, thus the iron in the iron triangle. They're really, really weathered and supported in that effort, and that's what makes them so vital to getting policy passed passed or killed in Congress and in the bureaucracy even. And we'll talk more about that when we get to chapter 14 with the, or excuse me, 13 with the bureaucracy. But the role of interest groups plays a critical role here. And this can include members of Congress that have retired, gone away and joined interest groups. We see that all the time in those coming back to lobby Congress, to be members of the bureaucracy or members of an interest group that's taking their case to Congress. All of that very important in terms of trying to get policy moved forward or to kill policy that could threaten their interest group's policy agenda. The types of information that lobbyists or interest groups provide breaks down into basically two subsets, what we call substantive information and what we call political information. Let's talk about substantive for a second. This is where a member of Congress can be provided with valuable information that they just don't have time to get to in terms of the depth, in terms of the level of expertise. They can't be an expert on every policy issue that crosses their desk. They can't read every piece of paper that is handed to them or that they get in their offices. They rely on their staffs to help with that information. But when an interest group can provide information on their point of view, whether the member of Congress decides to support it or oppose it, is sometimes inconsequential, but it basically allows them to have talking points that they can then use to either support or oppose a bill and provide a why that is well documented and well sourced. That interest group providing that information is critical because they basically are providing that member of Congress with information and becoming a resource that member of Congress can call on again and again and again. Now, if they provide them with bad information, they basically will be persona non grata the next time that member of Congress needs information. They will not go back to that source. If anything, they will make sure that they don't rely on them for information. So that's where whether you're a member of Congress that you're trying to target supports or opposes your issue, they respect you for the information that you're providing, especially if it's great information. But they will be the first to cut you off if your information is bad. So that's where valuable information is critical to a member of Congress, and substantive information is a great way to do that. Remember, this is the most valuable resource that a member of Congress can get from an interest group, information. Now, as a candidate, they're looking for cash, and an interest group provides money is probably the most valuable resource that an interest group can give to a candidate. But to a member of Congress, information is the most valuable piece of information. And talking about political information for a second from the candidate's point of view, political cues are critical here. Hey, we conducted a poll in your district and we found out that 86% of the people support this particular issue. That's valuable information the member of Congress probably doesn't have, even if they say they already had it. Why? Because they don't have the money to conduct polls on every particular issue that may come before their desk. They don't have that information. But if you provide polling data that is obviously substantiated polling data from a reputable source on this information and how people at home support or oppose an issue, this is critical information that the member didn't have before. You really rise in the ranks in terms of political information you're providing. Those cues are really important to a member of Congress, and that's where the information is so important. So remember, information key to a member of Congress, money critical to a candidate, and that's really an important distinction to be noted here. What can lobbyists contribute to candidates and to parties? They can contribute to SuperPACs. They can contribute all kinds of money to federal PACs, including the traditional ones that we see that arise from candidates or members of Congress. Business PACs tend to have the most money. Why? Their business interests tend to be most important because it's going to impact their tax base. They stand to make a lot of money from it. It's a good investment for them. And other groups tend to not have the same kind of money and monetary resources. An environmental group, for instance, doesn't have the same money and ability to bring together the type of resources, cash, that a business PAC can do. So it's a lot harder for them to raise that money and really get it out there to make it useful. We see over 4,000 PACs that are registered today, most of them coming from incumbents, those who are currently in office, the PACs that are registered, interest groups being able to mobilize their members in order to donate to those PACs, to continue to support that member of Congress, or someone who's going to oppose that member of Congress is critical. Being able to mobilize the members is a valuable resource that interest groups can provide through targeted mailings, email communication, the internet, advertising, the banner ads, all kinds of things to reach their members today is critical in terms of mobilizing their members, and that's a critical resource that members of Congress and opponents running against members of Congress see as critical, and the role that interest groups can provide there. An outside strategy would really be about getting the public to contact members of Congress, write your congressman, call your congressman, let them know how you feel about this issue and that you oppose HR 497. That's a critical component of the outside strategy that an interest group can provide. And if you have a significant number of members, like I talked about with AARP or NAACP or the NRA, you can really have an impact in making that happen. Independent expenditures, kind of the money spent separately from campaigns. Again, the idea there is that it's a separate or an independent expenditure. And then how are we going to regulate these interest groups? How effective is that regulation? All of this is protected by the First Amendment, and Supreme Court and court rulings have continued to rule for the interest groups in terms of their First Amendment rights in this regard. 1946 basically gave us the definition of lobbyist. The Ethics in Government Act in 1978 basically refined this to look at revolving door regulations and disclosure of financial information. We saw that broadened in terms of the 1995 Lobbying Disclosure Act, giving lobbyists more flexibility and less enforcement in terms of the role that lobbyists play in government, and gave them a much longer leash. Groups that are tax exempt cannot lobby on legislation or campaign. They could lose their tax exempt status. However, what we have seen is they create lobbying arms that are separate entities that are not tax exempt, and they basically push the limits of this. And we've seen lawsuits that try and bring them back in terms of enforcement, but it's a very expensive process, which is why much of it isn't done. You know, there are a number of groups that are basically watching this, are watchdogs on interest groups and their relationships in government. From time to time, we see them push back and sue, or having someone basically removed from government, but it's very rare. If it ever happens, it doesn't happen often. Now, we did see some pushback on some of this legislation that was passed in 1995 in terms of the Honest Leadership and Open Government Act in 2007, which did kind of add to some of the restrictions on lobbyists, more disclosure. But again, there's always loopholes, and interest groups and lobbyists find them all the time in terms of how do we get around it. Okay, we don't have to, we can't have dinner or lunch with them, with members of Congress. But if we stand up and we don't sit down, then it's not classified as a lunch or a dinner. Then we can stand there and have a conversation and have the meal brought to us in baskets as opposed to a sit-down meal. There's lots of ways to get around it, and they do it all the time. If there's anything that interest groups and lobbyists can find ways to do, it's to get around the legislation. And in many cases, they do. Because the path of water because water takes the path of least resistance, this is the issue that crops up here all the time. So hopefully you found this helpful. Hope these top 12 highlights in this chapter really focus on the role of interest groups and the impact they have and the effectiveness that they have on government today. And good luck with your studying. Live the 5.